bees and some other folks. Keep bees a little bit longer, you'll think, maybe I don't know quite as much as I thought I knew about bees. And if you keep bees long enough, which is how long I've kept bees, is long enough, you'll realize that you don't really know that much about them at all. Being a EAS master beekeeper, a lot of people think that's all that in a bag of chips. But the truth of the matter is, all that means is that on one particular day, on one particular exam, which was a pretty comprehensive test, I knew the answers. They could ask another set of answers and I'd have been dumb as a stump. But I passed the test. You know, whee! My bees don't respect that at all. so bees will give you a whole new level of humility. And that's just the way it is. And I knew immediately that I was in a place where I would not need a translator. When I heard a man a few minutes ago, when y'all were talking about honey flows, talking about shoemake. In West Kentucky, we have shoemake. I know that y'all got it here too now. Well, they have that up on the East Coast too, but they just don't know it. I was speaking at in case y'all hadn't noticed, I like to have fun. I mean, if I can't have fun doing something, I ain't gonna do it again. You know, I might do it once, but I'm not doing it again. I believe in making life worth living. You know, make it fun. And when beekeeping stops being fun and interesting, I'll start doing something that is fun and interesting, if I'm able to. But I was speaking on the East Coast, and honestly did need a translator for some of the people. And this was at a conference in Atlantic City, Beekeepers conference a few years ago, EAS conference, and I like to get to the conference room where I'm going to be speaking, if it's at a conference, a little bit early, because I'm notorious about being late to everything, and I like to kind of break new people in right. So I got there a little early. Well, that morning, very first thing, I broke a shoelace on my boot. I had some paracord in the Jeep. We drove up there, and because I like to carry a pocket knife, and you just can't do that on an airplane. And I feel unclothed without a pocket knife, or two, or three. But anyway, had paracord out in the Jeep, so I went and got some. Well, it happened to be orange. Well, so it worked. I cut a piece of it, made a boot lace, laced it up. My wife said, "You're not wearing that, are you?" And I said, "Well, sure I am. It's all I got. I'm not going barefoot." And so she said, "Well, just go ahead." So she's used to me by now. And I was in the room waiting on time to start the talk, the talk was about honey plants, nectar-producing plants, honey flows. And these four ladies came in. They were early too. I knew two of them I didn't. And they were from Connecticut and Massachusetts, and one from Rhode Island. And we were just talking, making conversation. And one lady said, "Can I ask you a question?" I said, "Well, sure." She said, "Why is one of your boot laces orange and the other one green?" And I said, "Well, that's sort of embarrassing, but I don't mind telling you." And she said, "Oh no, I didn't mean to embarrass you." And I said, "Oh, it's too late now, you know. Cat's out of the bag, so I don't mind telling you." I said, "Where I live, I'm from West Kentucky. I live 30 miles from the Mississippi River, out in the middle of nowhere. And nobody where I live, where I grew up, wears shoes except to go to church on Sunday, or if you're going out of town somewhere where everybody else is going to be wearing shoes. We don't want to feel like the odd man out. So we wear shoes to church and when we're out of town." I said, "So when I lace my shoes up, the only thing more embarrassing than being the only person that don't have shoes on is having them on the wrong feet. And I said, so I put an orange lace in the left one and a green lace in the right one. And this lady looked at me so serious, she said, really? I said, no, not really. We're not that stupid. Do you think we really live in the Stone Age? And I talk like this, but I don't. I have more shoes than this. And later on in the same program, I was talking about late summer sources, or summer sources for nectar. And I mentioned shoemake. And I said, I don't know if your bees work shoemake here or not. Just because bees work a plant in one place does not mean they'll work it somewhere else. Soil composition, pH, moisture, humidity, a lot of things come into play as to why bees will work, or why a plant will produce nectar, why they'll work it. And I said, but we have a plant that's a fairly dependable summer nectar producer, is shoemake. And of course, and I'll tell you guys this too, the floor is always open. Ask a question, because I can talk all night about this stuff and maybe not get close to what you want to know. But I'd made that statement earlier, and a guy in the back of the auditorium raised his hand. I recognized him. He said, in this really heavy East Coast accent, he said, can you explain exactly what shoemake is? I said, well, up here you guys probably call it sumac. And 2/3 of the crowd went, oh yeah. Well, this fellow said, so why do you call it shoemake and we call it sumac? I said, well, that's a simple answer to that. It's because we know how to say it. I hadn't been asked back to speak at that conference since then. But anyway, that just reminded me of that, the shoemake versus sumac incident when you were talking about your bees working shoemake. And ours is budding up now, and it's a little bit early for it to be budding up. It's probably a month early compared to what it usually does at home. And just so you guys know that I'm not lying about the boot, you know, I got the boots on right now that I wore to New Jersey. But anyway, the lace is still working. I'm not taking it out just to put one the same color. I might get to use that again on somebody, maybe. But seriously, if you guys have a question, it doesn't matter what topic I speak on, everything finally comes back around full circle, and we end up talking about everything about bees when I speak anywhere. I raise queens. I teach people how to raise queens. I use a couple of different methods of raising queens, but I use the methods that are the most efficient and work for me. I make nukes. I don't sell a lot of nukes anymore, but I make up several and teach people how to do that. Pollinate. I send bees to pollinate almonds in California, move bees to honey flows and to pollination. I'm not a big beekeeper. Well, I'm pretty good size, but I mean, I don't have a lot of bees compared to a commercial beekeeper. Like Jimmy, I'm not necessarily comfortable being referred to as a commercial beekeeper because I know a lot of commercial beekeepers and they got a lot of bees, and I just don't feel like I do, like I would fit in that category. But I guess I am a commercial beekeeper because I make my living with bees. And we usually keep between 600 and 800 colonies. And there's me and my wife, another couple, and Paul back here that we work the bees. And we stay busy at it, but we make money at it. If I wasn't making money at it, instead of having 600 to 800 colonies, I'd have 6 to 8 colonies. That would be kind of fun, and I wouldn't have to worry about losing money at it. But the way I look at it, there's no reason to lose money with your bees. You just have to learn to keep them alive and to multiply your hives. If you can do those two things, you're not going to keep every hive alive. In fact, some years you're not going to keep half of them alive. But if you know how to take one hive and make 4 out of it, you don't have to be anxious about that. And we have a lot of people come through our farm. Probably, well, we have one beekeeper school where there's about 300 to 400 people that come over a 3-day period. And then we have another 150 to 200 people come through our farm every summer to learn how to do that, to learn how to make their bees justify their cost. And some of the people actually learn. And some of the people are there to make sure to validate their thought that it can't be done. And you can go by, 2 people can go by the same recipe to make a cake, and one of them won't be fit to eat, but the other one will. The same way with beekeeping. If you approach it with confidence that you're going to succeed at it, you'll come a lot nearer to being successful. But if you approach it with confidence you're not going to succeed at it, you won't be disappointed. Now, personally, I'm a cynic. I believe that everything is eventually going into the toilet. And that's actually a very comfortable philosophy to have. People think cynics are all depressed and everything. They should be the happiest people there are. Because, see, I know when I do something, we'll take requeening a hive. When I requeen a hive, I know that they're probably going to supersede her in a week if they even accept her. And then I'll have to put another queen in there. So when I go in there a week later and there's a big frame full of eggs in there, I'm happy to be wrong. It makes me happy. But if I go in there and they have superseded her or killed her in the cage, then I was right. So you can always find a silver lining. But the key is keeping your bees alive as much as possible, keeping them healthy, and multiplying hives. And that's how you can stay in business with beekeeping. If you don't know how to do that, I tell people that when they come to our house, you'll either learn to be a really good beekeeper or you'll become a really good customer for somebody. One of those two things. Or you're going to take up another hobby. And that's just how it is. We don't lose that many bees. I have in the past, and I've gone full circle on non-treatment, not putting anything in the hive, and the first 5 years was really devastating. The next 5 years was really great. The next 5 years is a slow spiral down. And after that, I had to start treating again. If I wanted to stay in business, I had to treat the bees. And personally, it doesn't matter to me what you use for mites or if you even treat for mites. They're your bees. You can do what you want to with them. I'm not going to browbeat anybody over how they manage their bees. On the other hand, I don't expect to be browbeaten by anybody over how I manage my bees. I keep mine alive. And whatever it's going to take, I'm going to keep them alive. Yes?
What are you treating for mites in your bees?
I use 3 different things at 3 different times of the year. In the spring, I use thymol. And I'm just going to give the active ingredients, the actual ingredient that kills the mites. There are legal substances that you can use that have these ingredients in them. And that's all we'll say about that. But in the spring, I use thymol. Our bees come back from almonds in California in March, late March. As soon as they get back to West Kentucky, they get treated, because they've been in a common bee yard with thousands of other colonies. And I have no idea what they've been exposed to. So they get treated for mites. And they get checked for brood diseases. If there's a brood disease, I treat with an antibiotic. You have to get a veterinarian's feed directive for it now. But the most common brood disease you'll have is a type of foul brood that's almost always identified as European foul brood. It's not really, but that's what it's identified as. And when your larva stretches out lengthwise in the cells, and the first sign you'll see of it, the larva will be twisting up in the cell, the head crossing the tail, and it'll look kind of corkscrewed in the cell. And then it'll be lying lengthwise in the cell, like they're trying to crawl out of the cell, which is exactly what they're trying to do. The nurse bees stop feeding them. And that's exactly how larvae die from European foul brood. This European foul brood bacteria is multiplying in the midgut and absorbing all the nutrients, and the larvae are not growing like they should for the amount of food that the nurse bees are taking to them, and the nurse bees say, that's enough for cutting you off. You ought to already stopped eating by now. And they quit feeding them, and they starve to death. The bacteria eventually consumes the larva, and they starve to death. This one particular type of brood disease used to be associated with parasitic mite syndrome, but it's the same thing. It's the same cause, the same effect, but it'd be the last stage of it. It looks like that larva has melted in the crease of the cell, and you can get a veterinarian's feed directive for terramycin for that. TerraPro is a good product to use. Tylosin, if you want to use Tylosin, that one treatment will stop that. Now, that's when they come back from California. If they've got the brood disease, they get treated. They all get treated for varroa mites with thymol. The second treatment, they get split, everything gets evened up, and they go into canola. And after they come out of canola, which is happening right now, everything comes back from the honey flow, and it gets treated for mites again. Everything gets treated for mites with formic acid. And it's not a full treatment, it's a shock treatment with formic acid just to knock the mites down to get us into fall. If they happen to have a brood disease, anytime I see this brood disease, I treat it. I'll pull the honey supers off and I'll treat it. I treat with formic acid because you can use that with honey supers on. Early, I treat with thymol because you're not going to have honey supers on anyway at that time of year.
What's the name of that brood disease?
Well, for European foul brood is what you want to call it, because that's what will get you the veterinarian's feed directive. If it's not really identified properly anywhere except in old literature from about 20 years ago, when parasitic mite syndrome was a big thing. But that's what it is. It's a foul brood associated with parasitic mite syndrome. It's not even for sure whether it's bacterial or whether it's a fungal disease or whether it's a virus. But an antibiotic will stop it just immediately. It's way more tender than European foul brood. European foul brood usually takes 3 successive treatments of an antibiotic, 1 week apart. This one treatment will just knock it out. And if you have a hive that's got that and it's dwindling and kind of acting sick, if you put 1 treatment of antibiotic on it, you won't believe how fast it'll turn around. You won't recognize the hive in another week. 1 week, it's just amazing how to turn around. But that's that one particular disease. But if you go to get a vet's feed directive, you need to say, I've got a brood disease and it's been identified as European foul brood. You'll probably have to get an inspector to come look at it. They're going to say it's European foul brood also. It's okay. You know, that's what gets you what you need. So, yes, sir.
On the test kits that you can get, will that come back showing foul brood?
Yep. It might even come back showing American foul brood. Those test kits, they show false positives once in a while for European and for American. It will always show European, and sometimes it'll show American with it, but it's not American. Because American foul brood kills the larva, or kills the bee, the developing bee in the pre-pupal stage. It's not a pupa yet, but it's a large larva, and the age of the larva is way too small to be American foul brood and way too big to be European. It's somewhere in between there, and it's not. There's not enough romance around it to justify research that name it something. So maybe some of you guys can get it named after you. Quite an honor. We don't know what you got, but we're going to name it after you. And but the bees are treated with formic, just a shock treatment in the summer, early summer, and you don't want to leave a full treatment of formic in a hive when it's above 85 degrees. You'll sterilize queens, kill brood, maybe drive the bees completely out of the hive, but as a shock treatment it's pretty effective to knock the mites down, knock your mite level down, and you'll actually get some residual effect affecting the young varroa mites under the cappings with formic acid.
Kent,
Yes, sir.
explain what you mean by shock. Is it shock in the sense that you're putting it in there for a very short
Yep.
period of time, and what is that? Or is it shock because your dosage is a little smaller?
No, the dosage is
Is the recommended
One-
what the package says?
recommended what the package said, but you're just putting it in there for about a day and a half.
A day and a half.
Yeah, 24 to 36 hours is plenty to leave it in there. 24 hours will probably get all the control that you're going to need to get you to fall. But that knocks your mite count down. And anytime your bees have been moved around and they're stressed already and they've been in yards with other hives of bees, they're likely to come back with a lot of pests and parasites in them that you weren't expecting them to have, even if they're your bees. Because if one hive gets infested with something, it's going to spread. Drones drift so much, especially if you got your bees on pallets and there's 60 pallets within flying range. There's a lot of drift. Yes, sir.
85 degrees, we had that the first week of May.
Yeah, us too. And I mean, yesterday it was 93 at home. But that you don't want to leave formic in there for a full treatment at 85 degrees or above. But that shock treatment, it's okay. Just for a day, 85 degrees will actually help you rather than hurt you. It'll give you more control under the cappings, and by getting it out of there after 24 hours, you're going to do less damage to the brood and to the queen.
So are you putting it on a tray or something, or?
No, I just I'm quick and dirty with stuff like this. I raise the hive up, throw a pad in, and pop the hive back down. And when I go get it, I raise the hive up, scrape it off the frame, and drag it out. I'm using something like quick strips, like the Mite Away quick strips. There's other ways to apply formic that are allowed in the state that I live in Kentucky, but I don't get into stuff like that when I'm out of state, because each state has their own regulations about how you can apply different pesticides. Some pesticides, the label is the law. Some pesticides have no label for them that's definite about how you apply them, like oxalic. The third treatment I use is when I send bees to Florida to get them ready to go to almonds. We send bees in September, October to Florida, and when we make our splits down there, they get treated again with amatraz that time. That's the only harsh chemical, I mean really harsh chemical that we use is amitraz. So any mites that are tolerant of amitraz, either the thymol or the formic, should take care of them. Any of them that are tolerant to the thymol, the formic, or the amitraz should take care of them. Whatever you're using to treat for mites, if it's working for you, make sure it's working in the first place. If you're going to do a mite roll, check for mites, go ahead and treat your bees. If you're thinking they might need treating anyway because you're going to do a mite roll, go ahead and treat them. And do your mite roll after you treat. A week after you get your treatment out, check and see if there's any mites in the hive. Because if you treat your bees for mites and it does not work, but you think that it has worked, you're in worse shape than you were if you had never even treated them, really. Because all the treatments, they're not all harsh on bees, but none of them do the bees any good either. So you're stressing the hive a little bit just by treating it, and plus if it don't work on the mites, you're in worse shape than you were to begin with. So if you're going to do a mite roll, alcohol wash, or sugar roll, however you do it, I use alcohol washes just because it's quicker and more definite. And it does kill some bees, but I mean, I've killed so many bees at this point, a few more ain't going to make much difference. But I check about 1 out of 20 hives after I treat, just to see if I've got any mites. If I find mites, I'll treat them with something different. I'm not going to allow mites in our hives any more than I have to. And if I have to take the honey supers off and treat it with whatever it takes to kill the mites, I'll do it. I'm just not allowing mites to chase me out of the bee business. We're actually pretty good at killing mites. It's the viruses and bacteria that they bring into the hive that are causing our bigger problems now. And that's because the viruses change. Just like the flu virus or other viruses, they change. And they've gotten more aggressive in how they reproduce and how they enter the hive, how they're vectored into the hive. So it's more important to keep your mite count really low as possible. And after we treat in September, October with amitraz, you can't use that with honey supers on. When we treat in Florida, it's after we make splits. There's not going to be any honey supers on. Everything that we're treating splits, and everything we're treating takes about half the chemical to treat because it's a smaller hive, and it don't have a honey super on. Any honey that's in there, they're going to consume it in the process of building up. And that's all the treatment they get until they come back to Kentucky from California. But we don't have, well, so far we've not been having that big of an issue with mites. And the brood disease, when we see it, we stop it, and we don't really have that big of an issue with that. We still lose bees. Mostly it's overconfidence, beekeeper error from overconfidence in my part. Last year, the majority of losses we had were because I made some really late splits that I knew better than to make them. But I had a bunch of extra queens, and I've really felt bad about just wasting, I've got this $25 or $30 queen here, and I hate to just waste her, so I killed a $200 hive with her. And go figure. That's beekeeper logic, I guess. But I didn't really kill the whole hive, but the split didn't make it. I'll put it that way. That was most of our losses last year and the year before. And that's the definition of insanity, is doing the same thing by that, I guess I could probably be committed, because every year I make at least a few really late splits that I know better than to do it. Yes, sir.
You're talking about late splits. When do you consider it's too late?
Well, in West Kentucky, October's too late. That's when I was making these. I told myself that, actually I told my wife, and I was trying to convince myself by telling her, because if I tell her something often enough, then she starts repeating it back to me and I start believing it. And I told my wife, if these splits look like they're beginning to go backwards, I'll take them to Florida. And they'll build down there. And they started going backwards, and I didn't take them to Florida. No, they did what, in the back of my cynical mind, they did what I figured they were going to do. They died. And I'm not happy about that, but at least I had a lot of equipment to split in in the spring. Yes.
Why did they die?
The cluster was, they had food on them. I put a food patty on them. And they had food on them, but the cluster was too small to effectively cluster and stay warm enough in the winter where the cluster could actually move and, you know, with the food, to the food. And the cluster was dead. It was right up against the food, which that was a good thing. They were just too small. I mean, that was, if they'd been in a warm area, they would have done just fine. I have some bee yards in South Mississippi. They would have done fine there. And that's half the distance of going to the bee yard in Florida. But, I mean, why be just a little bit lazy when you can be really lazy? I didn't even take them to the Mississippi bee yard. Anyway, I had plenty of equipment to split into this spring when bees came back from California. And they came back good, you know, like they do. If everything's right, they'll come back good. And we split into them, and right now, up until yesterday, I was waiting on a shipment of frames to come in so I could split the rest of the hives that came back out of canola, because we ran out of equipment. That's actually a good feeling, to need more equipment than what you've got because your bees are too good and you got to split or put another box on, or they're fixing to leave there. So, yes?
You talk about your equipment. You had lots of equipment left over. How do you keep the equipment healthy so that you can put fresh bees in it in the spring or later in the summer versus other things coming in and taking over?
Open it up and expose it to light and air. And I lose a few frames to wax moths, but not many. I open the hives up, stand them on their end where they're exposed to light and air, and I probably lost 100 frames to wax moths last year, but that's out of maybe 6,000. I don't feel like that's too heavy a loss. There's other things that you can do that are actually legal to do. The menthol that you can put, put garbage bags or tarps or something around your hives, your empty equipment, put menthol up above it, or not menthol, but PDB, pyridichlorobenzene crystals, and keep the wax moths out of it. That works until it evaporates. After it evaporates, you're in big trouble when it evaporates. If you can keep your hives airtight, put them in something that's airtight, it'll work just fine. There's another product called phostoxin that it's legal, it's labeled for use. Don't breathe it, kill you just like it'll kill a small hive beetle. But in an airtight situation, then it'll kill everything in the hive, in the empty comb. But I've got some of it, but I don't use it because what I do works good enough. Just stack the empty stuff up on its end, frames, vertical, and leave an air gap between all your supers, and cross them off, stack them again, and you'll lose some, but you won't lose that many. Bats. If you got a bat house, put up some bat houses. They're really good for wax moth control. Mosquitoes too, but I can take getting bit by a mosquito better than I can take getting all my frames eat up by wax moths. I don't like either one, but bats are really good for that. Yes, sir.
How does a hive supersede their queen? So I've got a hive right now that is, the queen is not doing very well. She's laying sporadically at best. The population is 8. And they have created swarms, what look like swarm cells, queen replacement cells to replace her, but she's still in the hive.
Well, eventually one of those cells is going to come out, and either the bees will kill her or that virgin queen will kill her, one or the other. As often as not, it's the bees themselves that kill the queen when they're superseding her. It's not the virgin. But sooner or later, she's going to miss one of those cells, taking it out, and they'll replace her. Or you can replace her just by mashing her and letting one of those cells come out. If you're going to do that, pick a nice big cell and destroy all the rest of them. Just leave one good cell in there, because you don't want virgin swarms leaving there in case one virgin don't kill the rest of them. It don't always happen that way. One of the biggest faults I had when I started beekeeping was believing everything that I was reading. The virgin always kills all the other virgins. The first one comes out, kill all of them. Well, not always. In fact, not very often. That's why you see a bunch of little swarms come out. You know, these little virgin swarms come out of a hive. How come that she didn't kill all the rest of them? They don't always. In fact, they don't very often. But when I have seen a virgin come out and kill all the queens is when I had an expensive breeder queen that I'd grafted a bunch of cells off of, and I had a beautiful bar of queen cells. That's when a virgin would come out and kill all of them.
Yeah, it works good there.
That works good there. But in real life, it don't always happen. It's a lot more likely you'll have a virgin swarm, 2 or 3. So choose one good big queen cell and kill all the rest of the queen cells. You don't have to tear them completely off the hive. Just take a straight pin or something, or a knife blade, and just poke in the cell. The bees will remove them. And make sure you get all of them except the one good one. Kill your queen. And you will have helped them supersede. Be sure to check that in about 2 weeks and see if you got any sign of a queen in there. The virgin does not always come back from a mating flight, or the newly mated queen. About 1/3 of the time, on average, she's not coming back from a mating flight. Now, sometimes nearly all of them will. Sometimes 1 out of 4 will. Depends on the weather and how many pests or predators there are out there. And everything always comes back to Murphy's Law. You know, if you're just swamped with queens and nobody's calling wanting to buy them, every one of them it flies to come back.
Yeah.
But if you're people are screaming for queens and you could sell them for $50 a piece, then that's when you'll have a 25% return. That seems like just life as it is.
I've come up with a word for that. It's called agricultural misfortune.
Agricultural misfortune.
That's what I've been calling it, agricultural misfortune.
So beekeeping is an exercise in agricultural misfortune. Yes.
What do you attribute your cycle when you talk about when you first started about treatment? You had success for non-treatment for about 5 years. Was it?
Well, the first 5 years, first year I did not treat was 1994, and 94 and 95 and 96 were really tough years because Varroa had, they had really just overwhelmed the bees. And the bees did not have a pest-host relationship at all. You know, a pest does not want to kill its host because it don't have anywhere to live. Then it don't have any way to live. If that's it, if that's the only host for the Varroa, there never was an intention of killing the host, but our honeybees just didn't know what to do with them and didn't recognize them as a threat. Well, I didn't quit treating this. This wasn't some high-minded thing that I was going to save the world by creating a bee that didn't have to be treated. I was just cheap. I was tired of buying Apistan strips. And when I got up to about 250 hives, I said, that's enough. I'm not doing this anymore. So I quit buying Apistan strips and quit treating, and lost about 80% of the bees that first year. Well, I had learned how to, I'd been working with some guys in East Texas, some commercial beekeepers, and I'd learned how to make bees. And you come back from an 80% loss if all you do all summer is make bees. So that's what I did. We came back, we got back to the same numbers. I think I had about 220 hives at that time. We got back to the same numbers. I didn't treat again. I lost 75% of the bees next year. And we came back to the same numbers. And the next year I lost 70% of the bees. And I was thinking, you know, I may have to rethink this. It don't appear to be working very well. But the fourth year, I only lost 35% of the bees. And in case you can't tell, I'm a numbers guy. Percentages just appeal to me. I'm terrible, I mean really terrible at math once you start putting the alphabet in with it. And that's the stupidest thing to me that ever happened. The alphabet ought to be over here and numbers over here. They don't mix them. But anyway, percentages really appeal to my mind. So I lost 35% of the bees the fourth year. And I thought, well, I may be seeing a change in the bees, but we had a really good fall honey flow and we had a really mild winter. So I thought it could be an anomaly. But the next year, we didn't have a fall honey flow and we had a really hard winter. I lost 20% of the bees. And what happened, the bees just began to figure out how to deal with varroa mites. They began grooming better. They began hygienic behavior, pulling infested pupa out of the cells and depriving the varroa mites of somewhere to reproduce. It wasn't anything that happened just in my bees. It happened in pharaoh bees too, because swarms began to start being more common. By the year 2000, swarms were more common than they were in 1995 and 96. For about 5 years, there just weren't any swarms and no swarm calls. And then they started coming back. Bees as a whole began to develop this pest-host relationship. It wasn't anything I did. I just managed to lose money for 4 years, 5 years in a row by thinking that I was doing something. And for the next 5 years, things were really good. I didn't treat with anything for anything. The bees made a pretty good honey crop every year. They did well. What I noticed was they would survive with a higher mite count than was recommended. When I was doing a mite roll, ether roll is what they called it back then. You used starter fluid in a quart jar and rolled around. When I would do that, sometimes I would find 12, 13, 14 mites in there, which was 3 times as high as it should have been. But the bees were surviving with them. How they did it, I don't know. I don't know what their mechanism was for surviving, but they were. And they were making honey, so I was cool with that. But about 5 years into that, I started getting very poorly mated queens. And I didn't know exactly why. But I'd been breeding from the hives that did the best that lived through the winter and did the best. Built up the quickest in the spring. Those were my two criteria for choosing a breeder. And it never occurred to me that I was, by default, I was choosing characteristics that were, the bees were better at dealing with mites, but they were pulling pupa out. Well, the pupa that had the most mites on them were always drone pupa. I went to my drone yards, and I mean, they were just destroying the drone comb. The bees were pulling all the pupa out. I mean, there was dead drone pupa laying all over the ground out in front of the hive where they'd removed it. So I realized then that that's kind of silly of me, thinking that I was going to get away with all that, and I had to start treating again. So I started treating the drone colonies. I was not going to treat the queen mother colonies, the ones I was breeding from. I wasn't going to treat those, but then there started being viral issues. Mostly paralysis is what I saw, but the viruses were vectored by the varroa. And I think the viruses had always been there, and this bacterial disease had always been there, kind of under the surface. But the varroa were killing the colonies by themselves before we ever saw the symptoms of these other things, before they had a chance to incubate long enough to actually be a problem. So once viruses started being a problem, I had to start treating everything for varroa again, and that was a cycle. And now I'm back to I'm way past square one. I'm not there, because square one, we had one thing to treat varroa with. That was fluvalinate. If you were commercial, you use Maverick on shop towels. If you were not commercial, you use Apistan strips. And it was all fluvalinate. Well, now we have a lot of different products that are legal to use to treat mites with. And there's no reason to have a lot of mites in your hive. We don't need to be afraid of treating for mites. And I speak to a lot of different groups, and a lot of groups have a large variance in philosophy of the people I'm speaking to. Some of the groups are pretty heavy with people that don't want to put anything in their hive that's not natural. That's okay. I mean, they're your bees. That's fine. Get used to treating for symptoms. You'll end up treating the symptoms instead of treating the cause. If you want to be all natural, and that's all right. You can do that. You're not going to make a lot of money doing it, but you can keep your bees, and that's usually the purpose anyway. Not making money if you're not using any real chemical treatments. But we have a lot of things to treat with, and I tell people that if you take your dog to get a rabies shot, or if you have a sick animal and you take it to the vet and get an antibiotic for it, but you won't treat your bees, I mean, how's that square with it? I was raised on a farm, grew up on a farm, still live there, and still have livestock. If you have livestock that's sick, you treat it, you fix it. If my goats need worming, I worm them. If they're sick, I'll give them a shot of an antibiotic or something. You fix the problems that you have. Bees are livestock. Treat your bees like livestock, and you'll be a lot better off for it, because they're not pets. Yes, sir.
You're a big guy who has a lot of bees. Us little guys, where would we go to buy this stuff and get it? It looks like Man and Kelly and everything has all been eliminated. Now they got one company controlling everything.
Pretty much. Yep. There's other sources for the product, for the raw product, but to be legal, you have to use the one that's got a label with it. Apolife VAR is a good thymol treatment. because you can break it up in parts and you don't have the heavy thymol right in the middle in one spot. You have thymol in smaller amounts on the corners. That's a good thymol treatment. Mitaway Quick Strips or Formic Pro is a good formic treatment. Amatraz is Apivar strips is Amatraz. If you don't have but a few hives, the cost isn't really that prohibitive. You're going to be spending $10, $15 a hive per year to treat it for mites. Now that's really not that prohibitive. And as far as the antibiotics, TerraPro that's plenty good for the disease I was describing. TerraPro does a good job, and you can get that after you get a veterinary's feed directive. You'll send that a copy of that veterinary's feed directive to Man Lake or Daydan or whoever, and you can get the product then, TerraPro. It's a dust. You just put it across the end bars of the frames. No honey supers though. And there's places that you can get the raw material to make those, but it's pretty easy to misdose with. You've got to know how much of each thing to use to not put the wrong dosage in. It's easier just to use the pre-made product, for small beekeepers. When you get a lot of hives, you're going to be associating with other beekeepers that have a lot of hives, and they'll have plenty of it. They'll have plenty of the raw materials that you need. Not that I'm recommending to do that. I have to say that as a disclaimer. Yes, sir.
Yeah, Michigan State University did about a 5-year study on mites, and they were what I saw in the research part of it was they're talking about people go through the honey flow and they get all the supers on and they make honey, and they look at their hives about September, and they got 2 full boxes of brood or 3, and the hive just over the top, just making them going, And then they said, well, there's no need to be treating these bees. They're in good shape. They're fantastic. They go back next spring, they're dead.
They're empty.
Do you find that to be a habit with people?
Yep.
They just overlook that late in the fall?
Yep. We're not diligent enough, as beekeepers as a whole are not diligent enough at making sure our bees are healthy. We take it for granted because there's bees flying out of the hive, in and out of the hive, that this is a good hive. There's a bunch of bees up on the front of the hive, and it's so crowded in there they can't all get in the hive. This is a good hive. Well, it's a good hive right now. But here's the problem. There's at least 27 viruses that have been identified in bees. Only 4 of those have visible symptoms. So there's at least 23 viruses that there's no way of looking at your bees and telling that they've got it. And out of those 23 viruses, some of them will kill a colony. One of them is called, I'll guarantee you that 2/3 of us in this room, if we sent a sample of bees to Beltsville, they'd come back positive for Lake Sinai virus. Lake Sinai virus has no symptoms. I first got introduced to Lake Sinai virus about 6 years ago, and I was part of a study that sent some bees to Beltsville. And I was tickled, they come back looking real clean, except this one thing had Lake Sinai virus. So I called him, and because I knew the guy that was running the program up there then, and I said, "What's this Lake Sinai virus?" And my bees ain't never even been to the Middle East. And he laughed. He said, "Boy, you're such a dumb redneck." And I said, "Yeah, you're right, I am." He said, "It's Lake Sinai, South Dakota. It's where it's first recognized." And I said, "Well, what's the symptoms of it?" And he said, "Well, the symptoms are your hive dwindles down in the winter and dies." I said, "Well, that's really comforting. How do I know they got it?" And he said, "Well, you send them up here and we'll check them and see." I said, "So what do I do about it?" And he said, "Well, there's nothing you can do about it." I said, "So why do I want to send bees up there? I'm spinning my wheels." And he told me he said there's a protocol for treating for viruses that is not accepted, and the protocol was treating the root cause, which was varroa mites, vector the viruses into the hive, and then he told me something that you won't hear anywhere unless you talk to a very few people in the research community like him, which he got fired, by the way. But so you can't talk to him anymore. He's living in France. But a very few people will tell you, he said treat with an antibiotic. I said, well, antibiotics don't kill a virus. He said, well, what about black queen cell virus? Terramycin is the accepted treatment for black queen cell virus. I said, so how's that work? And he said, I don't know. He said, you'll have to figure that out and tell me. Well, it took me several years, but I figured it out. Found a study that's done on humans, not done on insects, but it does give a precedent for it. Some viruses require a portal to enter an organism, and the portal is supplied by a bacterial infection. Even though the virus is smaller than a bacteria, it has to have a portal to enter an organism. Not all viruses, but some. Obviously, black queen cell virus is one of them. Well, by him telling me that that's what you did for Lake Sinai, that kind of clued me in that he knew something that wasn't published and probably would never be published. But anyway, that's the protocol for treating for a virus. But Lake Sinai virus, when you go to a hive of bees and they're flying just fine, everything's looking great, and you notice that maybe there's not as many flying out of it as there was a month ago. But you think, well, it's the time of year the queen's going to be slowing down laying eggs. That's kind of natural. And then 2 or 3 weeks later, there's this hive over here is flying, and this was not really flying that much. Well, maybe the queen shut down a little bit too early. And you go into them, and everything looks healthy. The bees don't look sick. The brood don't look sick. It's just a small cluster. So that kind of gives you the thought that you were right. You know, the queen just stopped laying a little bit too early. But then, when you go back to check them and there's no bees flying out of them, and you look at it, the bees are dead laying on the bottom board. That's virus. When you have a winter kill, that the bees are dead laying on the bottom board, it's nearly always caused by a virus. And I don't know if it's Lake Sinai or what, but if it's a normal, I mean, what's normal about dying? I mean, other than we all do it. A normal colony loss, the bees will have their heads in cells, and then some of them will be in between the frames. The ones with their heads in cells are the heater bees, and they just ran out of fuel. Sometimes there'll be honey that far away from them. I mean, that's a typical winter kill. A non-typical winter kill is when you have the bees dead on the bottom board. That's not typical. Yes, sir.
Do you winter any bees in Kentucky, and
Yeah.
if so, do you feed them?
I do winter bees in Kentucky. The bees that we're going to raise queens out of, we usually leave a couple of hundred colonies in Kentucky that we plan to raise queens out of the following year, because I want stock that has survived a winter, at least in my area. And Kentucky don't have that bad of a winter. You guys probably have a similar winter to what we do because you've got a little bit of elevation on us. I mean, we're maybe 400 feet above sea level, maybe. There's 5 major rivers within 45 miles of our house, so our temperature is really moderated by the water around us. And we do have a winter, though. We have a kind of winter that kills more bees than a hard winter does because it's up and down. And every time the temperature is high enough that the bees can break cluster, but then goes low enough that they need to recluster, that's another opportunity that they honey. if bees are out of range of honey, the cluster can move as a unit down to about 30 degrees. 30 degrees in the sun, 35 degrees in the shade. The cluster can move to honey. But when you get down below 30 degrees, the cluster becomes static. And 2 to 3 days of that, and they'll die. They'll starve to death if they're not within the range of honey. It never gets so cold that they can't move inside that cluster, going back and forth to honey and back to get in the cell to create heat. They can move within the cluster, but if there's no honey in that within range of that cluster, they'll die. And that's why I leave them in Kentucky, because bees that, and some bees just don't have the genetic composition to cluster well. They're good at living in a warm climate, but they're not good at clustering efficiently or clustering around, within range of honey. Some are very good at it. The Russian bees are very good at it because they had to be. But they also have a very small cluster, which is, kind of goes against common sense, that a small cluster would overwinter well when a large cluster would not. But we leave about 200 colonies in West Kentucky to winter to raise queens out of, and I do feed them. I try to winter everything in 10 frame singles. And the reason I do that is because the volume is small enough in a 10 frame box, a single, that the cluster can't get away from the food source. And I put a patty about this thick, a sugar patty about this thick, right on top of the cluster, and put either a feeder shim or an empty super on top of that, and push a piece of insulation down on top of the patty. Check it about every 2 weeks to make sure they hadn't eaten up through the center of the patty. If they have, I just put a little bit more sugar on it.
Straight sugar?
What I do is I just make a patty with some sugar and a little bit of water and a little bit of Honeybee Healthy, and just not a loose patty, but something that will clump is all I'm looking for. And don't worry about mashing some bees with it; they'll get out from under it. They'll eat your way out of it. But after we started doing that about 4 years ago, we've lost less bees than we ever did. And I still have a few that'll be wintered in double deeps. We lose about 30% of those every winter just because they cluster in the wrong place. And the ones that are in singles, we lose between 5 and 10%.
I've been converting to all mediums for my brood boxes.
Yeah.
Would 2 brood boxes be appropriate?
Yeah. Yeah, you would need at least 2 mediums.
Do I need 3?
It wouldn't hurt. 3 mediums is just a little bit more than 1 deep, so it wouldn't hurt. 3 mediums wouldn't hurt, but 4 mediums would be too much.
3 mediums is almost the height of 2 deeps.
But if you look at the comb area, it's not, because you're losing about this much comb area between each box for the frames and gap in there between the mediums. So 3 mediums is actually about like a deep and a shallow.
What about water needs?
Watering?
Do the bees need?
When you put a solid sugar patty on them, you don't want ventilation. You want the condensation to come up and catch in that sugar patty. And the sugar patty stops all the condensation problems, plus it makes it accessible to the bees. It softens it enough they can eat it.
You put a hole in it so they get on top of it, or you
Nope.
eat from the bottom up?
No, they eat from the bottom. They come up from the bottom. And if you break down a hive in the middle of the winter, you'll see the clustered right up against that sugar patty like that. Instead of being clustered like this with a band of honey there or over here, they'll be clustered right up against the sugar patty, which gives them more area to access the food.
Are you using an internal cover?
No. No, I don't use an inner cover or anything like that. All my hives have migratory tops, but I'll put it in. Usually it's an empty super that I set right on top of that, and then take a piece of insulation, some foil back insulation, or just newspaper if nothing else, and just push down on top of the sugar patty. The sugar patty will be pretty big. It'll be as big as the cluster. I just push it down directly on top of it just to close the air off and keep the heat from convecting away from the bees. And we've had really good luck with that. I spoke to a group in southern Michigan about 3 years ago, and they were asking how we wintered bees, and I told them, and one fellow was just really interested in that, and he said, I'm going to do that. And I said, I didn't say that it would work here. I'm not sure. Your winters are not like my winters. And I told him I wouldn't really recommend doing that here. Maybe try it with one hive. But I happened to speak at the same Beekeepers Club the year after that at a different time of year. And he was in the group, and I just knew that he was going to give me down the road for killing all his bees. And he said, I tried wintering my bees like you said, and I was like, oh, here it comes. And he said, I had 45 hives. Now the 45 hives, I lost 2 of them. And he said, I broke them all down to singles and did just what you said. I said, well, I did not mean for you to do that, because I think that is the dumbest thing that you could have done, really, but I'm glad they lived. But I wouldn't have had that much nerve.
You mentioned something about the top cover. Do you have it so when your top cover is on, it seals it completely?
Yeah, seals it completely.
Summer and winter?
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you use a queen excluder?
I use a queen excluder for very particular things. I use a queen excluder to, when I'm making a honey crop, we put queen excluders on our bees in canola, and that's just for our convenience more than anything else. And because when they come out of canola, we'll break everything all apart and extract all the honey, and they all start again. And I don't want frames of honey and brood together up through 2 supers. But we use mostly deeps too. We don't use very many mediums at all. They're emergency stuff. But I use an excluder then. I use an excluder when we're making nukes, or when we're making up mating nukes. I use an excluder for that. Shake all the bees into the bottom. Don't even look for queens. Shake all the bees into the bottom, put an excluder over it, put open brood in a second box, come back the next day and just pull frames out of the second box, put them in nuke boxes. Really efficient way of making nukes. And I use them for that, but that's the only times I use queen excluders.
Are you using wax or plastic?
I use plastic. I use heavy waxed plastic. That's not because the bees like it better. That's because I like it better. Some things that I do, it has nothing to do with how well the bees like it, because I'm the boss, as long as my wife tells me. But I found that beekeepers really like shade and plastic. Bees don't like either one of them. So the only reason I use plastic is because there's 52 plastic frames in a box, and I can have 5 deeps with 10 frames each, sitting on hives with the bees working up into them before I can get 5 frames made and waxed. Put wax in them. Besides that, that's my nightmare job, is putting wax foundation in frames and wiring it. And that's, I figure if I don't make it to paradise, that's what I'll be doing for eternity. Putting wax in frames and wiring it. The upside of that is you can check your blood sugar anytime, because you're going to get so many sticks on your fingers with that wire that you'll be leaking pretty bad. Any other questions? What kind of problems you guys have with your bees down here? You have beetle problems?
Not this year. Last year it was pretty bad, but not this year. Not for me.
It's just like this with us. I mean, sometimes you think you got no trouble at all with beetles, and about the time you think that, you'll open up a hive and they'll nearly smother you flying out on you. But we hadn't had that big of a deal with them this year either. Had a couple of mating nukes that had a lot of larvae in them, but that happens. Mating nukes, perfect place for hive beetles. You got everything they want, nothing that they don't want. If the virgin queen takes a mating flight and don't come back, it doesn't matter how hygienic your bees are, when there's no larvae in the hive, they stop being hygienic. They're not going to remove those beetle eggs and beetle larvae. And that's what happens with mating nukes. And sometimes with large hives too. Yes?
How often do you check your hive to see if she made it back from the mating flight?
I check all the hives about 18 days after I put a cell in. If it's a capped cell, I give it 18 days before I check it. A lot of our mating nukes, we'll put a 24-hour cell in and let the mating nuke finish that queen cell. I found it's a lot more efficient way of getting queen cells made, finished. I don't have to have a finisher. I can just put them directly into the mating nuke and let them finish it. And my percentage has gone way up. You know, if I have my bars, I have 68 cell cups on them. If I have 60 starts on the cell cups, if I let them be finished, I'll end up with about 50 queen cells. But if I take that started cell at 24 hours, I've got 60. And just put them in nukes and let the nukes finish them. So if I do that, I wait 4 weeks before I check for a queen to see if a queen came back. And sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. I mean, that's the thing that's the hardest to come to grips with in beekeeping, is knowing that sometimes they live and sometimes they don't. Sometimes the queen mates and comes back, sometimes she don't. Sometimes she comes back and she's a nice big pretty looking queen and she's a drone layer. Or she just wasn't mated good. And she just lays, like you said, sporadically all over the frame. That's beekeeping. That's a, what'd you call it?
Agricultural misfortune.
Agricultural misfortune. Yeah.
So how often do you graft and do the full sales like that?
We graft
How many?
3 days every week. That's what we graft.
How many you usually graft?
We graft 68 times 2, 3 times a week.
Okay.
And
So you just have that many nukes to put all those in?
yeah,
I know you do.
Most of the time, as soon as the queens come back mated, as soon as we can see that they're laying fertilized eggs, to be sure about it, it takes capped brood. Got to make sure it's worker brood capped to be sure about it. As soon as we know that queen's laying fertilized eggs, we'll pull her out and put her in a bank. And or make a split with her. We'll pull her out and do something and put another cell in there and go again.
So you keep all the nukes basically queenless?
Well,
Basically,
yeah. I mean, if there's a queen cell in there, the bees don't act queenless. If there's a queen cell in there. If there's a pupa in that cell, that pupa has body parts. It has glands, and it's already beginning to produce some pheromones. It's very small amounts, but the bees recognize that as being a queen. And that's why a hive that has a queen cell in it don't act quite as crazy as one that don't have a queen cell, don't have a capped queen cell in it. It has to be a capped queen cell and a pupa in there for the bees to recognize that we have a queen, she's just not out and mated yet. And so you're right, it's they're basically queenless, I'd say 80% of the time. Jimmy?
You try and keep any drone colonies?
I do. I keep our main mating yard is the farm where I live, and we have 3 drone yards, and our drone yards are very simple. I mean, all they are is 2 pallets of bees in each yard, 8 hives in each yard. But each pallet has a frame that I scratch the comb on, damage the comb. When you damage comb and put it in a brood nest, they'll make it back all in drone cells. If you've ever been frustrated trying to get bees to pull comb out on a drone foundation, just take some regular foundation and take a capping scratcher and just mess it all up and put it back in there, and put it in the middle of the brood nest. They'll make drone cells out of it. Damaged comb gets remade in drone sized cells. So you'll have your drone comb within just a matter of a couple of days, 2 or 3 days. And I keep 1 frame of that in each of the 8 hives in points on a triangle from my farm. One of them is almost 2 miles away, one is about a half a mile away, and one's a mile away. Anything over a quarter mile and less than 2.5, that's where you want your drone colonies. Drones don't fly very far. They won't fly as far as a queen will. Quarter mile is about what they're going to go.
You have any trouble with laying workers?
Once in a while, yeah. I mean, I go places and speak, and people think I'm like the super beekeeper. Well, I'm not. I have all the same problems everybody else does. My bees die too. I have hives that I thought were queen right that they're not queen right, and because I didn't know that they had swarmed, or I didn't know they'd superseded, because I just didn't get back there and check it, and it winds up with laying workers. There's a very entertaining way to get rid of laying workers. Take a hive that is a nice big populous hive that's queen right, and trade places with the laying worker hive in the middle of the day. As all those foragers come back, they'll kill them laying workers.
Really?
It's pretty entertaining. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, you hate them laying workers.
I hate them laying workers. That's the truth.
Do you feed those drone colonies anything special for those drones to be healthy or anything?
As long as there's a good flow on, I don't feed them anything. But if there's not a flow on, I keep feed out for them. Not just syrup, but the pollen sub too. If there's a flow on, you're not going to beat a natural flow.
Right.
After you do that with a laying worker hive, then you can requeen it. Yes, sir.
Have you ever introduced virgin queens into nukes?
All the time. Yeah.
Okay. Not necessarily the cell, but
yeah, the virgins.
Hatched.
The virgins.
Okay. You put them in a cage for several days?
No, drop them in.
Drop them in.
Just drop them in. I try to drop them in a back corner. You can spit on them, drop them in. Sometimes you can just put them on the bottom board, and by the time the bees clean them off, they're used to them.
You say spit on them?
Yeah.
Just don't have a shower in your mouth.
That's right. Some of you guys, I might not want you to spit on them, but really, it's any. I mean, sugar water or anything. You can spray them with it. Anything that makes the bees groom them.
I got you.
And but most of the time, I don't do anything to them. I just drop them in kind of on the back corner of a hive, away from where there's a lot of bees, and I haven't noticed any difference in acceptance between that and a queen cell that I put in there. Virgin queens have a gland in their abdomen that produces a pheromone that repels bees. If you take a virgin queen and take a frame of bees strange to her and drop her on that frame of bees, they'll spread out about like that, about like a $50. And that lasts for about 5 seconds. But she can crawl, and then they're curious about her. You know, and they'll kind of crawl and follow her, but she'll just be kind of spreading those bees. That's how a virgin emerges from a cell and crawls to the queen and kills her.
Mm. That's when that happens. That's when she emerges.
Yep. Because she's got this gland that repels the other bees and keeps the other bees from killing her before she gets to the queen. The other queen never sees her coming.
Okay.
And that's one way to requeen a hive.
Well, I didn't know if they done that before they made it or after they
No,
made it.
that's before they mate it, before they mate. Now, once the queen is mated, that gland atrophies and it don't produce that pheromone anymore. After
Okay.
that's only active in a virgin queen.
Do you mark all your queens?
Now I mark some of them, but not all of them. Most of the ones I mark is when I'm showing somebody how to mark a queen.
You ever heard that bees will kill them?
I've seen bees kill them.
Because of the marking? Or
Yeah, I've seen bees. And if you mark a queen, most of our bees, if I mark a queen, they'll chew that off of her within a week.
Yeah.
So it's pointless for me to mark her. Now, I don't know why they do that. I don't know if everybody's bees are like that or not. Obviously not, because I get marked queens from people once in a while. But ours will chew that paint off of the queen's thorax within a week or so. You can still tell she was marked because there'd be just a little dots in a line around the thorax. But the only time I mark queens is when I'm showing somebody how to do it, usually. And they will kill them sometimes. Anytime that anything you do in a hive has the ability to cause your queen to get killed. If you put a mite treatment in and she happens to crawl across it and it offends one of the other worker bees smelling that mite treatment on her, then she's dead. It's a wonder to me that they live as well as they do, because all it takes is one worker bee to get offended by the queen or get offended by me and spread some alarm pheromone. The queen crawl through it and she's done for. She becomes the enemy to all the other bees. Last year we had a big problem with queen loss because we had this super honey flow that everything hit all at once. Black locust was a month and a half late, or a month late anyway. Tulip poplar is a month late, but blackberry and clover were right on time. And everything hit all at once, and the bees started filling the boxes up from the bottom to the top. They didn't go through to the top. It was all coming in so fast, and they pushed the queens out of the brood nest. And if you found the queens, they'd be in a little ball of bees up here in the top of the honey super. And a queen in a place in the hive where she is not supposed to be is likely to get killed because she's seen as a usurper, because she's not supposed to be there, and the bees that are around that are normally up there are not used to having a queen up there. So we lost a few queens before I recognized what was happening. Fixed it. The way you fix that, put supers on the bottom and your brood nest on the top.
Okay.
If they're wanting to reverse it, just go with them. You'll reverse it for them if they're insisting on it. I tell people this, especially in meetings where there's not many ladies. Well, this isn't vulgar or anything, but it can get you in trouble with the ladies in the group. But all those bees in there are females. When they start doing something different, you better go with it. You know?
Happy wife, happy life.
I've been married over 40 years, and that's how I've been married over 40 years. So, you know, it's an easy equation there to figure out. But really, that's what you do. When honeybees start doing something, you're not going to stop them. When they start robbing, it's way easier to keep bees from beginning an activity than it is to stop them once they begin it. And that's putting honey in the brood nest, or it's robbing, or any other activity bees do. If you don't want them doing it, you better keep them from starting it. If they start it, you got to find a way to live with it and just go with it. Yes, sir.
I got a one particular hive that swarmed probably 8 times this year, and all the swarms that I've called, the swarms, as soon as they get about 3/4 of a 10 frame full, they swarm. And I put supers on to give them more room, and I've actually went through and killed, I mean, one time I killed 8 calf queen cells and 4 queen cups.
Yeah.
Is that just the type of bee?
Yeah, that's just a genetic anomaly in the bee. And some people
I've
call
heard
them,
they're hunting the swarms.
some people call them swarmy bees. And that's why a lot of people don't like to catch swarms and raise queens from swarms, because they think they might get swarmy bees. And sometimes you do.
So this thing just to requeen it?
Yeah, requeen it. Requeen all of them, and all those swarms that you caught, and you'll fix that. On the other hand, you're making you lots of bees.
Yeah, I bought equipment several times this year already.
You've been a good customer then, but not because you're killing your bees, because you're actually good at raising your bees, or your bees are good at raising themselves. But yeah, that's how you would stop it, is to requeen it and change the genetics in that hive. But that's if you wanted to change the genetics.
I mean, two of them's already swarmed to the point that
Nothing there.
they lost the queen.
Yeah, nothing there. Well, see, using that 70-30 percentage, 30% of the queens aren't going to come back. So 3 out of 10 swarms are going to go queenless, just by averages.
So I guess the good thing is I always have queen cells I can put in those queenless hives.
There you go. There's a silver lining. And this has been kind of a banner year for swarms in West Kentucky. But now we've had a lot of rain that you guys hadn't got down here. We've never not been wet this spring. We got our corn and beans planted. We're still planting beans, but we got our corn planted just in between rains, and same way with hay cutting. It's been really wet at home. That, you know, I prefer a wet year over a dry year, not because of the bees, but just because I like to see stuff growing. I don't like to see stuff burning up out in the field. But a moderately dry year is generally a better honey year, because your bees can fly more. But the problem is there's not much moderation to the weather. You know, it's either really dry or really wet anymore.
Yeah.
Really hot or it's cold. We go from winter, just bang, right into summer, and everybody dies. You know, heat's killing us. Then we go right back into winter. And the weatherman thing that you guys were talking about a while ago, the truth of it is, the weatherman is always right about the weather 100% of the time. Problem is, he just gets the location wrong. If he says it's going to rain somewhere, but it may not do it here. Any other questions?
Have you had any problems with Africanized bees?
Yeah.
Particularly in California?
Yeah, bees coming back from California. There's a beekeeper in central Illinois that he buys about 3 loads of bees every year. You see these ads in the back of the magazine, ABJ, that will say loads of bees after almonds. Well, that's what he buys. He buys about 3 loads a year, brings them back to Illinois and peddles them out to beekeepers after almonds. And last year he called me and he said, I got some bees I can't get rid of. And I said, well, why? He said, well, I've just sold everybody that's got bees from me, usually gets bees from me, has already got their bees. I just brought back more than I could sell this year. I said, well, what do you got? He said, I'll make you a really good deal on 48 hives. Are they sick? No, they're not sick. They're healthy. They are full of bees. Okay. All right, bring them to me. He told me the price, and it's a good price. I said, bring them to me. Well, he brought them to me, and then he ran away. But he was right. They were full of bees, and they were full of brood, and all of them were queen right. But this much, you know, I can take really nasty temperament in bees. I can kind of deal with that. You know, it just makes my language really bad. But pull a frame of brood, open brood, out of the middle of the brood nest, and by the time you get it, by the time the frame clears the other frame, all the bees have run off of it and jumped off in the grass. That's an Africanized trait. That's one of the first things you'll see about a honest-to-goodness Africanized hive, is the bees, they're not just nervous on the comb. Nervous on the combs, they're all just running around. It's kind of hard to see the queen because she's in the crowd running around, or she's nervous too. When the bees get nervous, so does the queen. And she'll be flipping around on the other side of the frame, or maybe on the side of the box or something. These bees, 48 hives, all 48 hives, after they got used to me pasturing them, when I would smoke them at the bottom of the hive, take the top off, and you could watch them running out the front of the hive. They would run off in the grass. Wow. And you go through a hive that didn't have 500 bees in it, when there's actually 10 pounds of them out in the grass. Now, one thing that will do for you, it will make you very
learn how to use a smoker better.
Well, you learn how to use a smoker, but you learn to wear gum boots and put your britches down in the gum boot. Bees will not go up, down, and up like that. They'll crawl on up your britches leg, but you can whoop them off of you. But if you just put a band around your leg, they'll find a way around that. But if you put your britches legs down in some gum boots, so I learned a new fashion statement there in the bee yard. But the way I requeen those is like I was saying about the virgin queens, virgin cells. The way I requeen those was I split them. Everything went 2 frames of bees into a 5-frame nuke. Filled it up with more frames, and that's lots of frames when you got 48 double deeps. That was a whole bunch of 5-frame nukes, and I put a queen cell in every one of them. I only found 2 of those queens. All of them were queen right. They were full of brood, full of eggs. I only found 2 of those queens. The rest of them, even though they were queen right, you couldn't find them. They was out in the thicket somewhere. But I kept putting queen cells in them, and finally, by the end of the summer, those virgin queens had managed to kill all of the crazy queens.
When they go out into the grass and they run into the thicket, will they return back into the colony?
Oh yeah, they'll come back.
Yeah.
See, that's an Africanized trait, because there's so many things in Africa that eat bees and kill bees. When you bother a hive of Africanized bees, they'll just, first they'll try to kill you, and if they can't do that, they'll just leave. But then they'll come back. After you leave the hive alone, then they'll come back.
That queen can fly, can't you?
Oh yeah. Yeah. That's another thing I read. A mated queen that's laying a bunch of eggs is too fat to fly. Well, that's a bunch of baloney. I'm pretty fat myself, and I could still run if I needed to. So that's the way a queen is. She can fly. I've pulled out frames and watched the queen, or that she had laid a nice pattern of eggs, and been looking at her when she just flew off before. They'll nearly always come back, but it scares you to death when it happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Could you talk for a little bit about trap hives?
Trap hives for swarms, or for trapping them out of a building or something?
Trying to expand my bee yard. I put out some trap
Okay.
hives and I didn't do any good.
Well, put them in the wrong place. That's like catching rabbits in a trap. If you didn't catch any rabbits, you put them in the wrong place. Trap hives. Trap hives need to be a certain size. They need to be roughly the size of a deep plus a medium. That's the volume that swarms find most attractive, is a deep plus a medium. You want 1 frame of old comb in it, and a Q-tip with a little bit of lemongrass oil right in the back of it. And you want to hang it just inside the drip line, about 10 or 12 feet off the ground, right up against a tree. And secure it where it won't wobble around.
That last little bit, Sam?
You want to hang it right up against a tree, right on the edge of a woods, edge of a fence row. And if you're not catching any, if you don't see any bees around there, move it. Don't be afraid to move it. The best way to do it is to actually go to a water source and watch where the bees are flying away from the water source. Watch what direction they're going in, and go in that direction and see where they're going into a woods or something. That's where you want to hang your swarm trap, in that direction.
But a deep plus a medium is a pretty good sized box.
Yeah, it is. It is. They also like some dead space on the bottom. If you use a deep with medium frames in it and a medium with medium frames in it, that's about what they prefer.
How long would you leave it there before you decide